On governments, we have these three guys, Seth Kang from KU, and NC from CUDS, and Jan Galas from CUDS. On opposition, we have Albert from KDS. We have Scott for Deputy Leader of Opposition. And we have Ahyoung Kim from EDIS. And without any further ado, I'd like to call the Prime Minister to open the government's case.
In the wake of the Libyan massacre by the hands of Colonel Gaddafi, LSE was swift in trying to demote and try to distance themselves from their relationship with his son, Saif al-Assad. They openly stated that they were ashamed of any association with such Saif al-Assad, but at the same time, they also did not deny the fact that they received a lump sum of $2.4 million of donations from the Gaddafi family. When it was found out later that a certain Switzerland school has accepted Kim Jong-un into its Institute of Higher Learning, the Switzerland University first decided to keep it shut. We don't know for sure. Later, when it was clearly found out by a Paris authority, they openly stated their discomfort, and they have also disdained their relationship with the Kim family. The problem is, they still took the money. If you look at the relationships of these institutions of higher learning, ladies and gentlemen, you can find out that they are openly knowing of their relationships of these children of despotic, oppressive regimes to be one of a nature of being shamed rather than proud of. They are also openly more than welcome to say to the authorities or to the press that they do not want to be associated with them in any case, but they always take the money. The case of the proposition is simple, ladies and gentlemen. Our stance is that you should no longer take the money. We believe that when you knowingly understand that the purpose of these children coming from oppressive regimes come to your universities not just to receive a higher education, but for the purpose of extending their propaganda and to legitimize the regime. And when the universities simply receive these people not because of any educational purpose, but because they need the money, we believe that we need to restrict certain values that were a place of higher education which prides itself on teaching people of certain values that should be promoted within a society, in a liberal democracy nonetheless, and also prides itself on being in the epitome of the ethical and intellectual center of these areas, that they should not do so. And for these reasons, yes, ma'am.
So, the government team here wants us to debate against bribery only and not about meritocratic acceptance into the universities?
It's not bribery. They openly gave them money. Please sit down. The proposition has three arguments. Number one, please sit down. Number one, universities should know that they should not receive money from these institutions when they know that it's basically from blood money. Second argument is that they also are extending a political tool of these oppressive governments, and they're not really teaching them anything. Don't let them fool you for a second. And the third argument will be given from my second speaker, which will be talking about the marginal social impacts. Please sit down. I'll let you talk later when I'm finished. Now, the first argument, ladies and gentlemen, is as follows. Like we said before, if you look at the case, for instance, in the University of Washington, the Vice President of Nigeria, Atutu, has also been alleged to have these donations and also these entrances into generous fundings for the university. Later, the University of Washington has stated that there were allegations of corruptions, but they shut up because they took the money. You look at Lincoln University and the cases of corrupt officials as well. They knew of these allegations, but they shut up and took the money. We think that they should stop shutting up and taking the money. Now, they can't go up and say that we're short on money, the economy is bad. If ExxonMobil tried to do something like that because the economy is bad and went to Iran, or if Walmart tried to go to Cuba because the economy was bad, they'll be probably summoned up to a grand jury before they could even finish the word hypocrisy. But why is it then, when there is a systematic, I didn't know you're standing up, but sit down. When there's a systematic procedure of these oppressive governments sending their children to these universities with blood money, with money that they have stolen from their people or have embezzled from the resources that belong to the general populace of oil money, of blood money, and they're using this money to fund these universities, and when the universities knowingly understand where this money came from, we believe that the universities should not receive them. Yes.
So regardless of donation, bribery, all those things, are you accepting the son of those bad guys or not?
No. Because that also leads to the issue, like we said again, that we need to understand why is it that these universities are so open to criticizing these despotic regimes when they're openly saying that these are wrong acts, but at the same time, because they need money, they receive the people that they're criticizing at the same time and receiving the funds that they're giving to them. The second argument will also like to point out the fact that these universities understand what they're doing. If you look at Sayyid al-Assad, he did not necessarily take classes on political science. He was taking classes on architecture. Clearly, LSE was not teaching him how to be a better leader. If you look at the cases of other leaders that went to these universities, also the purpose that they might point out that it's about reform and teaching these people to be nice people doesn't really make sense either, because the universities don't give a damn of what kind of courses they take as long as they bring the money. The problem that we have, therefore, is that it is used as a tool to legitimize these new regimes. If you look at the case of Kim Jong-un, you probably remember that there was a hint of hope that the Korean people had, saying that he was educated in Europe. He must be an open guy, he must be a real democracy lover because he was educated in Switzerland. He came back, the first thing he did in the line of business was increase the minefields in the DMZ because, fuck liberty. I want mines. And I want my people that run away to liberal democracies to get their legs blown off. Please sit down. There has been no evidence or proof that there has been any efforts from the universities to do this as an effort to make things better. There's also no hint that these countries are sending their children to make the situation better. If anything else, al-Assad, Uday Hussein, Kim Jong-un were sent to these countries to give out a propaganda that we are this affluent, we are this open, and we are this well taught. And it also legitimizes them and gives out that smokescreen that next time it will be better. They need that because they don't elect their officials with voting. They appoint them. So they need to give the international society a certain sense of credibility. And that is the only reason why they're sending their children to Oxford or to Harvard or to Washington or to Lincoln or to LSE. And that is the only purpose, and these universities know it. Ladies and gentlemen, don't be fooled by what these universities say openly. These are the places that breed Wall Street bankers and Republicans. They know what they're doing. They are the place that breeds conniving, sleazy people. They know what they're doing. And they're doing it anyway. Because rather than upkeep their values, they need a new building in the business administration section. And therefore, they will take the money. We're saying you should stop taking that money.
For 7 minutes and 14 seconds.
Okay, I thank the Prime Minister for his speech. I'd like to now call upon the Leader of Opposition.
Prefer the son of Kim Jong-un over the son of Kim Jong-il in school of Harvard or the school of Kim Jong-il? Would you prefer him to be educated by Western democracies in a Western liberal university or a very dogmatic education, very Juche philosophy education by North Korea? I think this debate is not about money, it's not about tuition. This debate about whether or not our universities are going to accept those the son of the bad people that they don't like so much. And this debate is not about whether or not we accept the idea of ableness by accepting them to our university, ladies and gentlemen. It's actually a good idea for us, a strategic benefit to be able to accept them in our school so that we have them in our hands and then learn our Western values, ladies and gentlemen. The issues that are brought by the opposition team is very clear. Our stance is allowing students into our schools without judgment actually furthers democracy than their stance on whatever the NC wants to say right now. say.
Okay, so like the change you want to bring in today's debate about Saif al-Assad killing more than their fathers, more than 5,000 people, that kind of change you want to talk about, right?
No, they from the beginning they want to kind of distort the debate into money, like people killing each other. No, this debate is about role of democracy, role of schools, and the strategic benefit that we get from having these kids actually go to Harvard and actually go to LSE. The argument from the opposition, coming from the opposition, is very clear. The first argument is that principles of liberal democracy. We're going to argue how treatment of son of Kim Jong-il by them is how hurting the principle of democracy. Secondly, we're going to talk about the role of schools and how it's important for universities to actually accept the idea of non-discrimination, non-politicization and stuff. Thirdly, we're going to talk about the strategic benefit that we are able to get with our policy. Our second speaker, Scott, is going to cover that. Sit down. Alright. Their whole case is that, first of all, money that they're paying is evil. Secondly, that money actually goes into fund evil guys who are on the financial districts of New York. Those universities are also evil. I don't think the idea of the picture of evil people that they would like to draw is clear cut. We think that we need to distinguish between the idea of tuition and the idea of donation or evil bribery. We don't think that accepting donation is a good idea at all on the side of opposition, but that's different from, for example, Kim Jong-un going to LSE and paying like the minimum tuition that he has to pay. So the opposition, we also disagree with the idea of fueling like conflict and stuff by getting all that donation. But simply LSE or Harvard or those schools can simply say no to the donation, but still accept those sons of schools because it furthers our Western democracy. Now, sit down. Another point coming from the Seth was that they actually come to these schools to legitimize their regime. First of all, I don't think that is necessarily true. Like Kim Jong-un going to Harvard doesn't necessarily legitimize the regime of North Korea. Nor does it prove that he's wealthy enough to go to that school and therefore that regime is justified. Like the line of logic that they're using is simply not there. Sit down. And we actually think that it's actually good to send them to like having our schools because first of all we have them in our country. We know what they're doing. They actually have interactions with other students, other professors. It's actually good for us. Moreover, we think this can be used as a foreign policy tool because they're in our country, right? So it's actually better for us. The first argument coming from the opposition is very clear. It's this idea, first of all, of non-discrimination. And secondly, I'm going to talk about the idea of tolerance and inclusiveness. And what do you have to say to that, Jen?
In the present situation, you have the children of elite people already studying in the status quo. You need to prove to us that indeed that particular change and spread of Western democracies is actually happening in the present situation.
We think that role of education or the impact of education happens in the long term. For example, in the case of Lee Seung-man, in the case of Korea, the fact that he learned democracy from Harvard University added a lot to the development of Korean regime. And their burden of proof actually is to prove that the people who are studying in those Western democracies are actually doing any harm, which they are failing to prove. The first argument, going back to my argument, the first section was that of non-discriminatory action. We think that any systematic practice of infringements of fundamental rights based on a trait that somebody cannot change is discriminatory. In this case, the reason why they do not accept, for example, Kim Jong-un or Kim Jong-nam to Harvard or LSE is because they're from a regime, because they're the son of a bad guy. We don't think that quality should be used in a case where we're accepting schools to the university, right? The reason why we accept them is because, first of all, they want to study, and second of all, they're good enough to go to LSE and other countries. So we think that their discriminatory measure is actually bad enough. Moreover, their policy of outright discrimination, for example, actually sets back the clock on discrimination. It actually gives the government more justification to discriminate in other cases, such as like Patriot. We think that their action is going to open and give justification for the government to do more discrimination than less, and we don't like more discrimination. The second argument coming from the opposition team is also very clear. We think that the role of schools, role of university in this particular case is not to be politicized. The idea of Veritas Lux Mea was that truth will set you free, that truth is your light. And we don't think their idea of using university as a tool of as a political agenda is actually a good idea in any case, because university is an independent research and education institution, and it should not be using its acceptance policy of students for purpose of whatever foreign policy, whatever politics agenda they would like so much, ladies and gentlemen. Secondly, I'm going to talk about the idea of meritocracy just a little bit. We think that the idea of meritocracy and the idea that good students get in regardless of your race, regardless of how ugly your father is or how chubby your father is, in the case of Kim Jong-il, we think those should not be the criteria. The only criteria they're using is whether you're smart enough to get into LSE and Harvard. So at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen, would you prefer Kim Jong-un going to Harvard on this case, or going to the school of Kim Jong-un, Kim Jong-il? And that, I think we are taking this debate. Thank you very much.
Speaker spoke for 7 minutes and 26 seconds.
Okay, I thank the Leader of Opposition. Let's hear from Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, if you're living in the democratic society, you have a responsibility, right? This guy said university is different. So why university is different? My friend who is working in Daewoo International is quite famous, right? He paid a lot. But the thing is, because our country wants to have a sanction to the Iran, his company is not trading with that country because they are living in the democratic society. They have a partial responsibility. These guys must talk about why university is different, or because the country we are talking about right now, this country already got sanctions. Why university is different, they can trade just because they have a merit. But I don't think that is the debate, right? I don't think all the dictators are that smart. I don't think they can, without donations, they can go to university. Even if that is not the case, and even if they are smart enough, they are genius, they can make a lot of like nuclear weapons for their countries. I don't think university must accept them, because university itself emboldening the maintenance of that oppressive regimes. Will be explained further in my rebuttals. With that, I have one argument. Firstly, I'm going to talk about why our policy can change behavior of oppressive regimes. Before moving on that, I have two rebuttals in today's debate. First, Western value, and second, emboldening their maintenance, right? First, Western value. The proposal coming from opposition was, if you study in US and you will have a lot of friends and you will contact with many people, will open your mind. Suddenly, I don't think that is the case, right? If you want to open your mind, you must study more. But these guys making their own palace in the New York City, Manhattan City, they're just living their own life. The example coming from us, Saif al-Assad, who is studying in the LSE, right? If you want to talk about him, he killed more than his fathers because he never encountered with Western values. I don't think these guys show any streams of changes of these people. We don't think there will be changes, right? If you are sons of oppressed regimes. Why? Because firstly, even if you open your mind, you can't change all your countries, right? Because there's a lot of generals, there is friends, there's political people who have a checks and balance in their own countries. And secondly, because they don't want to give up their privileges, that is why they don't want to change it, right? They said Isungman was fine, but I think Isungman pretty much shot president because they killed a lot of Korean people, right? I don't think there's a lot of changes they want to talk about in today's debate because they don't want simply, right? Look at the Saif al-Assad, he killed more people. I think you need to have more response. Yes.
So are you trying to contradict your prime minister who actually said that you are not okay with taking anybody from any oppressive regimes, even if they are qualified?
Oh yeah, merit. I'm going to go there. You helping my structure. Thank you. That is my second response, right? Because merit, even if they are smart enough and genius, we can't accept them. Because university itself emboldened that oppressed regimes. Why? Because there's two messages university is sending to the society. First, word, which was coming from my first speaker opportunity, they never engaged with. Because when al-Assad worked and studying in the LSE, people expect, because he opened his mind to Western value, they will change their behavior. But I don't think there was any changes. Second, sending out the messages inside of their own countries, right? Because even if you are in the oppressed regimes, you need some kind of legitimacy. Because if you study in the LSE and if you're smart, if you get like degrees and like doctor's degree from the old famous countries, you will get more legitimacy than other countries, than other peoples. That is why you guys embolden other people. These guys say China, right? China, a political party, oppressed regime which is run by a political party, oppressed regime which is run by families, different. Why? In the political party, you can't maintain all your life as a leader of the countries. That is why you want to remembered by the peoples. That is why they easily bring the changes for the people's benefit. But the problems of people who are family running oppressed regimes, they don't have to. Even if they're doing shit, they will maintain their sustenance. That is why there's a lot of different. The countries like Russia, countries like China, is not debate. It is not about the debate. Moving on, my first argument, why we can change behavior of oppressed regimes, right? We don't think we can change the regimes themselves, obviously. I don't think that is the burden for us. But there are many things we need to change this, right? Like religion, political prisoners, providing better treatment. We think in our policy bring change better than their own policy. Why? Because we think dictators are the most reasonable person in the world. I don't think they are stupid, but I think they are stupid, but they are reasonable persons, right? They know what is the benefit and they know what is the harms of the policy, right? But the thing is, moving and studying in the abroad as their sons is having benefit because that embolden their ideas and legitimacy. And when they calculate harms and benefit, if they can send their kids in the US university and that helps their maintenance, they will accept the deal from the Western countries, right? Because this is a part of the sanction. The part of the purpose of sanction is we don't want to change all the regimes, but we want to get slightly results from their countries. That is why we can bring slightly changes from their countries. But even if they don't bring any changes, I think that is fine. Yes.
I thought you were not accepting that all, regardless of how much money or whatever they do in terms of foreign policy.
I don't understand what he said, because I don't think this is really relevant, right? Even if you don't have a university in outside of countries, I don't think that is the problem. Why? Because there will be more trickle-down effect to their own countries. Right now, in the oppressed regimes, university is not that great. Maybe there are some great universities like Sogang, like Kim Il-sung University, but they just want expertise making their own nuclear weapons. That is why that university is not trickle-down effect to their own people. But in our policy, if they cannot study in the US university, they must make their university better than before in the long term. Not just about chemicals, must about economics and management, all the shared peoples renowned by the republics, right? Because they want to get a lot of legitimacy. That is why our policy brings the better trickle-down effect to their own countries. If you want to make a very nice university, you must have a good professor, you must get a lot of people from your own countries. That is why people is going to be educated more. That is why people get more benefit rather than your own benefit. Mr. Speaker, what about point today? The burden of proof coming from opposition is, if we allow people to come to the university, they will change their own regions, right? The change only we see from those people is Saif al-Assad killing more than 5,000 people. If that is the change you want to talk about, we don't care, because I don't think there is a positive change. But in our policy, university shouldn't embolden the ideas of oppressive regimes, because these guys provide legitimacy. In the long term, our policy brings more trickle down, more benefit to their own peoples. That is why I'm strongly opposed to this motion.
Speakers spoke for 7 minutes and 18 seconds.
Okay, I thank the Deputy Prime Minister for his speech. I'd like to now call upon the Deputy Leader of Opposition.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thanks, you guys. Very interesting round. I'm going to get right into it. I'm going to start with a fundamental misunderstanding on this side. They seem to not really understand what sanctions are and how this actually proves our arguments. Sanctions do not preclude charitable activity in an oppressive regime. They allow charities to distribute medicine or to provide food for people, even if we have economic sanctions on that country. Similarly, educating children is not buying oil from these oppressive regimes. It's not providing them with money. It's a service. It's a service to try to change the regime. That's exactly what sanctions are trying to do. They're trying to implement change in the regime from the people. They're trying to make the people so upset with the regime because of the lack of economic success that they change their government. And that's exactly what educating the children of these regimes can do. It can bring about change. Now, NC talked about Western values, and this leads right into the new argument that I wanted to bring up as the deputy leader of opposition. He talked about how Gaddafi's son is just living in the city. He's not actually being educated. He's not actually studying, which I think is a ridiculous characterization. They're forced to take classes on everything, and even if he's studying architecture, there's still general educational requirements. He's still going to have to learn about history. But let's take a look at the example of Gaddafi's son specifically. He would have killed people anyway. Don't you think it's better to have tried to change him? Now, our side will admit that LSE did not actually change him, but you can't blame LSE for trying. They did the world a service by saying this guy needs to be educated. And the reason they later rebuffed him was because he went on to join the regime and kill all those people that they keep on waving their hands about. The reason that they're waving their hands about that is because LSE failed. It should at least try, and that's our stance on side opposition. And it leads right into my new argument, which is about educating them in Western values. Because, as I mentioned before, there are educational requirements. Back at my university in America, there was a moral reasoning requirement. It's essentially a philosophy and ethics class. There's history requirements where you have to learn about the tyranny and evilness of past regimes. You're going to have to learn about World War II. You're going to have to learn about the Spanish Inquisition and all those other horrible things that happened in history. And it's from a Western moral perspective of those regimes being evil. So it's very easy for these people to then link it back to where they come from. No, thank you to either of you. So in another area, they talked about how they tried to poo-poo our argument of friends having influence. But you have to remember, peer pressure is very significant. Imagine if you're sitting in class and you're like, that's Kim Jong-un's son right there. You know, like, people are going to go up and try to talk to him. They're going to try to see, what does he actually think? There's going to be discourse and dialogue with that student and other students, and we think that that's valuable. That's one of the reasons we can all agree that debate is a valuable activity, because it has discourse and dialogue. When people are forced to confront ideas, they're forced to question them, and they can often change their minds. Sure, Seth.
So you're saying that these children of despotic regimes are not nice enough because they didn't take a liberal arts class of philosophy saying that what your dad is doing is bad? That's what you're trying to do?
I'm saying we should at least try to give them that class. It might not work, but it's worth a shot. Like, let's give them a philosophy class and say, don't kill people. Let's see if they actually listen to it. There's no downside to doing so, which I'll get back to on your side of the case, don't worry. And I'd like to give a couple of examples of success where this has actually been a positive area. For example, Shen Wu is the son of the Singaporean dictator. Shen Wu, he was educated at Oxford, and he despises the Singaporean regime. Even though Singapore is an example of economic success, they still have great human rights abuses and restrictive government policies. He does not like that. He's been educated in the West and wants to change his grandfather's policies. Another example is Xi Jinping. I'm sure I'm pronouncing that terribly, but he's running for the premier of China right now. He's educated in Harvard, and this is a great example of incremental change that we keep talking about. China's slow move towards liberalization is coming from people that have been educated in the West. He went to Harvard, he's back in China, he's running for premier. He's not going to change China dramatically and make it into another US, but he's going to slowly implement policies that reflect his Western values that were given to him by his education. Now I'm going to go back to case side and talk about their side of the case. No thanks, I have a lot to get through. Now, the first thing that they talked about was blood money. Now, you have to remember that tuition and bribery are very different. Our side of the house is never going to accept bribery. We'll always say that bribery is bad and they should not accept blood money in the form of large donations that are clearly just to try to get their kids into those schools. But tuition, we'd say, is fine. But secondly, what about if the students went there for free? Does the side government have a problem with that? What if they didn't take any money from these children's parents and said, we just want to educate them for free? Our side of the house firmly supports that. The second thing that they talked about was how it's a tool for propaganda. It's going to legitimize the regime. I question this very strongly because, remember, this is the children of dictators going to the school. It's not like we had Kim Jong-il going into Harvard. It's the children. And there's always a chance the children will go back and join the regime. But there's a strong chance that they'll be changed. So how does it legitimize the regime? All the dictator gets to do is say, hey, look, my kid is smart, he went to Oxford. There's not really a benefit to the regime. There's no legitimacy that's granted to his government because he has a smart kid. The next thing that they talked about is how there's better education in the home country, because if you deny them access to Harvard, they'll make a Harvard in Pyongyang. Well, by their own logic, wouldn't that help the regime even more if they had a world-class educational institution that could churn out legions of bureaucrats and dictators that can join the regime? Because those classes won't have the liberal Western values instilled in them. They'll be from Pyongyang's perspective. It'll be Harvard world history, but from North Korea's perspective. We'd say that that's a bad thing. We'd at least want them to get some sort of Western education. Sure, last one.
So like you said, there is a difference between political party and like family party, which is run the oppressed regimes. You must differentiate with two different people.
Family party?
Like run by family and run by political party. Russia is political party and Al-Assad is family party.
Well, there's really not an important difference between the two. If you have parents who are educating you poorly, we'd say, we'd like to try to educate you better. We'd like to put you into an institution that can try to change your mind and say what your parents told you was bad. So, now, moving on to our arguments, which our partner talked about, Elmo here. First, about the discriminatory nature of this policy. Because you're punishing children for the sins of their fathers. You're saying, if you're from Korea, you can go into Harvard. If you're from China, if you're the son of a dictator, you can't. It's punishing them. It's discriminatory. For example, what about the son of Bernie Madoff? Or the son of a serial killer? Where do you draw the line? Where do you say that because your father was bad, we're not going to accept you? It's a very ambiguous policy and a morally flawed policy. We'd like to have a meritocratic environment where students of a high quality can all be admitted no matter what their parents did. If their parents were poor and living in a jungle, if their parents were a despotic regime, we don't care. If you qualify, you can get in. Lastly, the role of schools, we don't want them to be politicized because the definition of regime can be very ambiguous and Western political powers can define regime appropriately to meet their political ends, and we think that's a terrible thing. So for all of these reasons, we strongly urge an opposition ballot.
Speaker spoke for 7 minutes and 16 seconds.
Okay, I thank the Deputy Prime Minister for his speech. I'd like to, Deputy Leader, I'd like to call upon the government whip.
Mr. Chair, let's clarify the debate. Today's debate isn't really about schools being meritorious when it comes to their students, or being fair or unfair, whether we should accept them or not. The debate is simple. We've been talking about liberal democracies, whose in the present situation are actually taking the moral high ground, Mr. Speaker. In the present situation, these particular liberal democracies have been sanctioning these despotic regimes already, be it economic, even travel ban to the wife of Al-Assad in the present situation. So the debate is simple. All we wanted coming from the government side is this, that we want to extend it to their children, and we want to assess whether this kind of situation would bring more benefits than harm. And that's basically the debate. So this isn't really about the school, whether you should be fair or unfair. This is about liberal democracies being firm to their stand that they want to sanction that particular country. We're going to assess this debate in 3 levels. I'd like to first talk about the responsibility of schools and liberal democracies. Second, let's talk about marginal changes. And lastly, the projected image. Now let's talk about the first case. Let's talk about responsibility of schools and liberal democracies. The only case coming from the opposition side is this. We want the present situation to still or to keep happening because they believe and they hope that just because the fact that these children of these despotic regimes are studying in Western democracies, they would actually learn these moral Western values, assuming that these things exist, Mr. Speaker. But the point there is this. What we're starting coming from the government side, that this is actually a false hope, Mr. Speaker. Because this has been happening since time immemorial, and this doesn't change anything. It only actually creates more detriments in the present situation. We've been already talking about here, coming from the government side, the moment that these particular children would go back to their country and they need actually to lead the country, they cannot simply implement all of these changes just because they were exposed to liberal democracies. There are a lot of complex situations that they need to face. Let's take, for example, the power dynamics in that particular country. Like, even if you're in a despotic regime and even that particular regime is autocratic, you still have your administration and also the opposition side. The point there is, if you are that particular leader in that kind of situation, you need still to impress and at the same time get the majority support of other people. Now, if your country is really autocratic and you're that particular person who wants to change the kind of situation and implement all of these liberal democracies, what would happen to you? It would be simple. You'll be ousted. And that's not the kind of situation that these people would want to happen to themselves and even to their family. First point, none. So, let's move on to the second case. Let's talk about this entire concept of marginal changes. We've been already talking to you about that maybe the moment you do all of these things, it would actually create marginal benefits, because we cannot really say that we're going to solve and address all the problems of these of despotic countries. What we're saying is that at least with this minimal additional sanction that we're giving to them, it could actually lead to a lot more changes. Like, for example, we've been talking about this entire concept that maybe because these leaders are really so concerned with their legacy, because the idea of becoming a leader isn't, especially if you're in the autocratic regime, is that you don't simply want to become the leader. You want to preserve an image that you became a very good leader. You want to be written in the history. And the only way to do that is actually for your family to continue the legacy of this particular leader. And we think that if this is the kind of mentality that leaders have in these despotic regimes, maybe the idea that that their children may not be able to get good education, that they cannot really continue the legacy of the family, it can even actually lead to some compromises, which NC actually talked about in his speech. Second, we even thought that maybe if they're really that hard and they don't really want this kind of situation, then maybe they would think of something else. And we think that even if Scott a while ago said that there's no difference if they would simply invite foreign teachers and teach these children in their country, we think that's actually more beneficial than the present situation. Because if you try to compare, in the present situation, the people coming from despotic regimes who only get that kind of education are those children of these oppressive regimes. But the moment you try to invite foreign faculties, maybe in your country, is that the idea that you can actually reform the academic industry in that particular despotic regime. So the point there is, maybe you can actually improve the school. Maybe, you can still introduce your Western liberal democracies. But the point there is, the target isn't only the ruling class. Maybe this could spread to the entire society. So the point there is, you've not only improved the school, but you've also educated the locals. And we think that's more beneficial as compared to the status quo. Because we've already argued, the status quo isn't doing anything in the present situation. Maybe this would be a good try for us at the end of the day. But before anything else,
how are you entering into these countries that you're actually shoving away from the rest of the world, saying that you're a bad person? Do you think you will get an invitation to teach debate in North Korea, sir?
Exactly our point. Because now they're pushed on the